Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi everyone. We'll go on to understanding the federal system as established under the Constitution of India. Why is this topic relevant and why should we discuss this over here? Because I believe that um, the Constitution lays down the fundamental principles of public administration in the entire country. Now, India is quite a large state. It has a lot of territories, and it, as I told you earlier, has five geographical zones, and it's actually a country that is united by the constitution, but it has very different cultures, systems in different parts of the country, right from the northeast to the northwest to south to north India, and hence the kind of political kind of a map that is required is probably a map that the constitution had to make a choice upon. So either the constitutional framers could have chosen between a pure federal system versus a pure unitary system. Now, what is the system of the Indian legal system? Is it federal or is it unitary? Is something that we have to probably take due note and consideration of. Interestingly, you will notice that smaller countries are better governed by the unitary system, whereas bigger countries, because of the kind of governance challenges that it can pose, are generally governed by a federal system. Now, a federal system is one in which there are two kinds of government, basically. Please note, one is a national government, the other is a regional government, or what we call as a state government. So, federal systems have two governments, and the constitution actually divides the functioning between the two governments. Right, that is what a federal system is, and you will notice that the jurisdictions of the two governments are clearly laid down in the constitution. What each of the governments can do. Now, a federal system, especially with a large territory or a large country, is good to govern, and it probably takes care of the kind of diversified culture, uh, diversified language, diversified needs of growth and development differently, and that creates a very unique position of governance. Now, in the federal system, while the states have powers to decide, the central government or the federal government, as the case is the one that keeps all the units or state units together, right? So that is what the federal or the national government usually does. So there are countries where the unitary form of government is definitely established. These are smaller nations. They have chosen to be unitary, but they're not pure unitary. They would have, town councils or municipalities, but they are not government in the sense. They are basically there to manage the cities and the towns. And because it is a small country in terms of geographical and territorial area, a unitary form of government is the only way in which it can run. You can't have two parallel governments. And there is no need or necessity of the same. Unitary feature is very easy when the culture of the nation is just almost one, and there is no kind of different culture that exists in different states. There is no major problem between a majority population and a minority population. There is no major difference of ethnicity or identity of the population, and those are probably the reasons why the constitution of those countries have chosen the unitary form of government. And so let's take some examples, and so we can understand federal government, federal system, and unitary system with the help of trying to see how the countries of the world have chosen or taken them. Britain, France, Japan, China. Now, Britain, again, it's a very small island nation. France. France is decent, it's quite big. Japan is again a stretched island. China has a single party kind of rule. Italy, Norway, and Sweden. These countries have a unitary model of government. So they have one strong central government. The nation has only one government to choose from, and that government is the one that actually administers governance over the entire territory of the country. So I repeat: Britain, France, Japan, China, Italy, Norway, and Sweden. Now there are countries that have chosen the federal system, and I think you will notice that this is a choice that they can make. And the United States is one major example of a federal system. So is Australia, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, and also Switzerland for that matter. They have a federal model of government. So usually, federal model of government, we say there is a federal government, which is the national government. In our case, we say it's the central government, or you can call it the union government, right? And the regional governments generally are called as state governments or what we call as provincial governments. And of course, the term federation is derived from a Latin word called foedus or foedis, which means a treaty or an agreement. So this word is very important because the federation is created as a state due to the political system. But of course, that political system comes because there is a treaty or an agreement between the various units or state or provinces. So, United States, we say, is a union of states, right? The 50 states have created the union. They have empowered the union or the federal government as the central government. So that is how the federal system comes into place, right? And of course, the states actually kind of a creation of kind of a consensus model that this is how the central or the federal or union government will look like, and these are the powers that they will have. Now, federal governments or federal system, as we call, is very important because now you will notice that because in the federal system there are two kinds of government, you need a document which will separate the powers between the two governments, state versus central, so that there is no clash, there is no conflict. The states remain united and not divided. What states can do and what federal government cannot do. I think all this needs to be stated, right? So I think the legal system, where the role of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary have to be very clearly spelled out and adhered to, for which a written constitution is very, very critical. And that's why you will notice that Britain does not even now have a perfectly written constitution. The British constitution is to be found in various documents. They don't require it because there is only one government. The definition of that is already there in several legislations about what the government of Britain ought to do. So where there is a kind of a unitary system where you have a single government or a national government, these kinds of governments can create regional developmental councils. That is definitely permissible. But the regional developmental councils serve the federal government and not the state government. Please note, whereas in a federal system, the state governments can have their own executive wing of the government. Like, for example, in state of Karnataka, which is part of the Federal Union of India, there are so many subjects that the states can administer, for which they can have their own employees, executives, and they can pay, they can raise taxes, they can also have the control on the police system as the constitution would want them to do. So the division of powers are very clearly laid down, and as you know, in the Constitution of India, you have the 7th schedule of the Constitution, which has a union list of subjects on which the union government can legislate and administer. Then you have a state list, again the list of subjects on which the states can legislate. Then you have the concurrent list, which both state and center can legislate upon. However, in the concurrent list, you will notice that we have a strong kind of a union government framework. So if the central government decides to make a law on a subject in the concurrent list, then that would prevail over the state's right to legislate on a concurrent subject. So, that's how a federal system ought to work, isn't it? The federal system ought to keep the states united. The federal system has to look at uniformity of law for the federation, not just for the regions. So that is where the federal objective is fulfilled, and that's why strengthening the federal government or the central government or the union government is kind of a feature of the federal government or the federal system that is created by the constitution. Now, uh, one of the things that you should know is that United States actually has two kinds of citizenships. You can have a state citizenship, you can have a federal citizenship, but that is a very unique model in the US. Whereas you will notice that in India we have a single citizenship, right? It's an Indian citizenship and there is no state citizenship. This single citizenship concept comes from a unitary form of government. It's a unitary feature. So you don't have your state kind of your. Of course, you can have your identity of the state. You can have the language of the state. You can have the culture of the state. You can have your own kind of affiliation to the aspirations of the state. But in terms of holding citizenship, the Indian Constitution declares that there is only one citizenship. I think we have already discussed detail on this topic already. So that is a unitary feature, right? So you don't have state except in the United States. The supremacy and rigidity of the Constitution is a unique feature of the federal system. There is independence to the judiciary. The judiciary is very strong because, again, the judiciary is the determining factor of the Constitution and the division of powers. And most importantly, friends, the federal system has usually a bicameral legislation. Now, a bicameral legislature means usually the federal government has two houses. Like, for example, in Britain, we have the House of Commons and the House of Lords. I think we have also had the Lok Sabha, which is the House of Commons, and the Rajya Sabha, which is like the House of Lords in the United States. Similarly, you have the House of Representatives in the United States and the Senate in the United States. So it is usually a bicameral legislature that is established in the federal system. Now, unitary features in the Indian Constitution. Now, please note, the Indian Constitution is neither federal nor unitary. Yeah, they are neither. We say, and most of the jurists and authors have said, that India is actually a quasi-federal constitution. So, when we say quasi-federal, it means that it is a mixture of unitary and federal system. Now, please note what are the unitary features of the Indian Constitution. First and the foremost, strong center. This is a unitary feature that in no cases that the states have complete autonomy and independence. Please note the center is so strong that it can override the states by imposing precedent's rule. So it's a strong center. So strong center is usually what you have in France, you have in Britain, you have in China, and the union or the federal government can take over any provincial or state governments. They can actually interfere with interstate disputes. They can pass legislations on concurrent list. They can pass legislation to give effect to an international treaty. So all these makes the central government the most important government. And please note, in terms of revenue that is generated through taxation, also the central government is more powerful than the state government. So this is a unitary feature which you can very clearly see in the Indian Constitution, right? And finally, don't forget this. Very importantly, there is something called residuary power that is with the central government. Now, what is this residuary power? It means that if there is any topic or subject which is not mentioned in the seventh schedule, either of the lists, union, state, or concurrent, this is residuary, which means leftover. There may be many such topics which have not been mentioned in the original constitution, like, say, information technology, artificial intelligence, so on and so forth. So many new challenges and areas come in governance, and every subject is not going to be mentioned in the constitution. And hence, if there is a new subject on which a law or a legislation ought to be made, please note, finally, the constitution says that that residuary power is with the central government, which makes the center a very strong system. Now, you will also see that states in India or provinces in India they do not have what is known as territorial sovereignty or territorial integrity. It is better to say that sovereignty is one with the nation and integrity should be something. So the parliament or the central government uh, can alter the areas and the boundaries and the name of a state. So states do not have a right over their territory. The central government can decide. They can change the territory of a state by dividing the state into two. For example, we have seen those divisions quite very recently in Andhra Pradesh when Andhra and Telangana were created. They can alter the areas and the boundaries and the name. And this, to be honest, just requires a simple majority in the parliament. So you will notice that this is something that creates what is known as the theory of destructible state jurisdiction. So states, jurisdiction can be destructible or disrupted by the central government. And this is a very strong unitary feature of the constitution, which means the most powerful government in India is not the state government, it is the central government, right? Because please note, if you see the simple powers of the central government, everything that is important are with the central government. For example, foreign relations, currency, most of the aspects of what we call as direct tax, military, army, or whatever armed forces as you want to call it, intelligence. All of these are with the central government, right? What else is the unitary feature of the Indian Constitution? An integrated judiciary. The judiciary is all into one. So you don't have an independent state judiciary, which the state alone can seek control or can have its decision to appoint that. So it is this, it is the Supreme Court of India that manages the court system in India. That's very clear, right? So the state or the government in the provinces do not have any control on the aspects of the judiciary. We also have an integrated audit and integrated election machinery. So you'll notice that the Election Commission of India, which is a constitutional body, decides the elections and the process and the procedures of elections all over India. So there is no state independent machinery. This is the central machinery that works in the state. So that is uniform across the entire territory of India. So that's a pure unitary feature, like one agency relevant for the entire country. So is the audit system. And similarly, developing this all India services, there are so many all India services like Indian Foreign Service, Indian Administrative Service, Indian Revenue Service, Indian Police Service. These also are a feature of the unitary system, and India has those features in terms of the executive appointments to the government. Very interestingly, going forward, if you see the appointment of governors, this very clearly will tell you why the unitary feature is very, very relevant. Now, please note, every state has a nominal executive head. And this nominal executive head is in the state called the governor, in the center it is called the president. And please note, the governor is appointed by the central government. He holds this office under the pleasure of the President of India. He is an agent, so-called, of the center, rather he represents the center in the state. He is someone who watches the state and its functions for the central government. He is accountable to the central government. He exercises the center's power or jurisdiction on the state with the mandate of the central government. So he is aided and advised by the central government, not by the cabinet or the chief minister of the state. So this is again a unitary feature because the central government has a final say in state activities. So please note, this appointment of governors by the center, India did not follow the American model. They took it from the Canadian model. Yeah. So some of the veto powers on state bill are also critical and important. Where in some cases you notice that the president enjoys absolute veto power over some of the state bills, and without the president's assent, some of the state laws cannot come into existence at all. Anyway, we'll talk about that a little later, which are these bills. And then you have the emergency power, isn't it, where you can put a national emergency and it can actually dominate the states as well. Finally, why we think there is a unitary feature in the federal system of India is because states can send their representation to the Rajya Sabha or the upper house, as the case may be. So that is kind of sending your representation to the central government, and the central government also having to consult the Rajya Sabha, as the case may be. So you will notice that while India is not a pure federal system, we have a strong unitary feature. We may be considered like what Professor K.C. Weir said, that India is a quasi-federal kind of country. He remarked that Indian Union is a unitary state with subsidiary federal features, rather a federal state with subsidiary unitary features. Yeah. So I think the domination of the central government, or the tendency of the constitution to allow domination to the central government, is uh, both in respect to the political power as well as in respect to the financial power. So this is something that we have to clearly understand. And that's why you will notice that in the erstwhile, kind of era, we had a planning commission that would actually kind of balance the interest between the state and the center, especially in terms of the developmental agendas and purposes. Uh, are we extremely federal? Are we extremely strong in terms of our federal system? I think a lot of people would say that in India, centralization tendency is very strong. While I don't believe that observation is correct, but of course, when you read the constitution and the functioning under the constitution, you may tend to agree with that kind of an observation, that there is a over centralization that is happening in this country, and which may not be good, because a unitary form of government may find governance very difficult and challenging, considering the landscape of what we have. And hence, there is something called the marble cake federalism, or what we call as, what is a marble cake? A marble cake is a cake which has multiple layers, uh, right? And you mix the layers in that marble cake. So the model of governance that is suggested in India for everyone to adopt, and the constitution to actually advocate, is the model of cooperative federalism. And cooperative federalism is a very important character of the Indian constitution. You will see that the cooperative model has worked and existed for a long period of time. And in this case, the central government does not treat the state government as a weak government. They cooperate in the governance. They actually take them into confidence. There is a consensus building process and a provision. And I think the states are always taken together whenever any kind of administrative decisions or any kind of execution of policies are taken into consideration. So I think to maintain national unity and to also maintain democratic processes. Please note, when I say democratic processes, you should mean that democracy is not just by allowing citizens to vote. Democratic process is a process of consensus building. It's a process where everyone is heard, and everyone has a say in how the country is run. And I think it's a collective process of taking the nation forward, for which the state government should have a very critical and an important role to play. So, maintaining this dual polity or dual form of government is not only in the interest of the union government, but it's also in the interest of the constitution, because I think centralization or concentration of power in one government may lead to a lot of abuse, misuse of power, and it may lead to a lot of deprivation on social and economic justice or grounds, as the case may be. So I think the cooperative federalism model wants the union and the state government to work together without, infringing the powers of each other. That means respecting each other's authority is the way forward. And I think that kind of feature of cooperative federalism is the best way that the nation can take what I call as the constitutionalism forward. So, what India must do? India must respect the autonomy and the independence of the states. It must respect the division of powers. It must allow states to have their own autonomy. It must maintain the states' unities, all the states' unity, 28 states' unity, and integrity, and in exceptional circumstances, ask the states to join the national integrity or integration movement. It is important that in quasi-federal structure or in the cooperative federalism movement, territorial disputes between the states are resolved as soon as possible. Resource sharing disputes are resolved amicably, especially something like the river sharing disputes. The emergency power that is there in the constitution should be rarely and sparely utilized, and regional aspirations must be allowed to grow. Cultural identities of states must be completely respected. The kind of interference that is required from the central government should be very, very minimal to the extent that is required as necessary and not more than that. And I think development, which is a major growth agenda for the government, should be kind of equal among all states. So I don't think the central government must discriminate on those developmental agendas as well. One of those observations of the court in SR Bommai case is, I think, very, very relevant and important. Please note, SR Bommai versus Union of India, a case in 1994, is a very important case about why the federal government cannot abuse the powers of imposing president's rule in the state. This power has been heavily misused, and to that extent, I think the Supreme Court lays down the principle of respecting the rights and autonomy of the state and not interfering it as and when is required, or not using the political agenda of the central government to override the legitimate right of the state government. So the SR Bommai case laid down that federalism is a basic structure of the constitution, and this basic structure cannot be infringed, violated by the central government at any cost by misusing the powers in the constitution. And what did SR Bommai case do? They laid down guidelines about how the president's rule can be imposed by the state. It cannot be used arbitrarily, unfairly. There has to be a reason why that president's rule comes into place. And I think SR Bommai changed the complete way in which this power in the constitution is going to be utilized. I think it did mention why the state governments are relevant and important, and how should the central government respect the autonomy of the state. And I believe after 1994, after the SR Bommai case, imposition of president rules has decreased. It is done in very extreme circumstances, but till 1994, it was done on the political whims and fancies of the central ruling party. So I think the Supreme Court clearly protected the federal structure, protected the state governments from arbitrary actions of the central government. So friends, let us understand the parliamentary system in India before we go to understanding the judicial system in India. Now, you will notice that, all of these are the different forms of public administration. While we have said that the parliament has a role to define the scope and ambit of public administration, the executive is the one that will probably implement it on ground, and the judiciary will probably check any abuse and misuse of public administration. So the Constitution of India, under Article 74 and 75, that deals with the center or the central system, and Article 163 and 164 that deals with state systems, lays down a form of government called the parliamentary form of government. Now, modern democracies across the world are classified into either parliamentary form of government or presidential form of government on the basis of the nature of relation between the executive and the legislative organ of the government. Right? So, the presidential form of government and the parliamentary form of government, these are two forms of government that are generally there. So, the presidential system of government usually is a different system wherein one will see that executive is not necessarily responsible to the legislature directly, and the constitution creates a kind of independentness for the legislature in terms of its office. So the president, who is the chief executive in a presidential form of government, is the single most person running the government. So it's not a government of collective responsibility. It's not a government of the cabinet, as the case is. The parliamentary system of government is called the cabinet form of government, and it is based on what is known as the Westminster's model of government that was far prevalent in Britain. It was also prevalent in Japan and in Canada, and now it's very well established in India. So the presidential form of government is highly executive based, whereas the parliamentary form of government is based on the power of the legislature to make and state the law. Now, of course, one would say that the parliamentary system of government is more a safe government. It is a government that tries to make responsible decisions because it does not concentrate or focus on the powers of a single individual, and it also lays down the office of the parliamentarians, which is fixed for 5 years or whenever it is to be decided for, and it enjoys the largest section of the community's confidence because you have people actually sending their members of parliament to actually vote or decide the law, and hence it is more democratic than the presidential form of government. So the prime minister in a parliamentary system is the head of the cabinet. He is the head of the ruling party. He is the head of the party that has majority in the parliament, and that's why the prime minister, or he is the prime minister. That means he is the chief of the ministers, whereas it is the ministers or the cabinet ministers who are actually running the government, and they are actually taking the political administrative decisions, as the case may be. However, in a presidential form of government, the political administrative decisions usually are vested in one person, and you will notice that he is the real president. He's not just a nominal president, he's the executive president. But an executive president is one who actually not only decides how to implement, but he also decides what to implement. So he is the one who actually takes real, tangible decisions, as the case may be. So the features of the parliamentary system are the following. First and foremost is that the president is a nominal executive. Please note it down. So that is in India. He is not the real executive. Please note it down. The real executive is the prime minister. So we would say that the president is a kind of a de jure kind of an executive, and the prime minister is the real executive who actually exercises this power on behalf of the president in consultation with the president. While the president is the head of all states, the prime minister is the head of the government. And if one reads Article 74 of the Constitution, it provides for a council of ministers headed by the prime minister to aid and advise the president in the exercise of his function. The advice so tendered to the president is binding. Right? So that is the parliamentary system that is being brought into existence. Of course, you will notice that in a parliamentary system, there is a rule of the majority party, and it is a political process. The political party that has a majority in the Lok Sabha usually forms the government, and the leader of that party is appointed as the leader of the House of the Lok Sabha, as the Prime Minister, and the President of India actually gives oath to the Prime Minister. Interestingly, it is the President who appoints all the ministers on the aid and advice of the Prime Minister, and you will notice that, interestingly, the President definitely has a real executive role when there is no single party that enjoys the majority in the House. Then, as the President and as the case laws in the Supreme Court have decided, it will be the duty of the President to call the single largest party of the House to try and form a government, try and prove a majority in the House, and then run the government. So the President can also ask the major ruling party to form a coalition government. This has happened in the past, that where a single party has not been able to successfully get a majority seats in the parliament, they have gone in for a coalition. So we have seen many coalitions in the past. NDA, which is a BJP-led coalition, has ruled the country, has formed the government. UPA also has formed a coalition and formed the government in the center. In the parliamentary system, one of the most important aspects that you will see as compared to the presidential form of government is the collective responsibility. Now, the president in the presidential form of government sticks his neck out. He is solely responsible and liable, though he has his own team members that can take those responsibility. But people have voted in his name, and it's a very strong leadership position that is required in a presidential form of government. However, in a parliamentary system, the bedrock of such a parliamentary government is the collective responsibility, which is ensured through the lower house of the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. It's like a teamwork. They have to work together in the spirit of running the government. And please note, a minister can be removed in a no confidence motion. So they have to ensure that each minister's function within the principles of the constitution as well. Parliamentary system interestingly brings in a political homogeneity. And I think that's very critical and important, because you will notice that it gives rise to many political ideologies and political parties. So some of these political parties come from different backgrounds, from different cultural aspirations, different states, and this brings in a kind of a very diverse system of political governance, with a lot of political parties who come into the parliamentary system. So it's not the two-party system that is there in the United States or in other systems. This does give rise to a lot of new political parties that may emerge from time to time. There are a lot of political parties in India that are state-specific, and there are very few political parties that have got the national status. But every state can actually bring in that kind of a political homogeneity, as the case will be required. There is something called double membership in a parliamentary system, which means that the ministers are the members of the legislature as well as the members of the executive. So once you are appointed as a minister with a state or otherwise, or even cabinet minister, you are holding an executive role and an executive power. But that is granted to you only based on the membership of the houses, either the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. So the rule is that once you are appointed as a minister, within 6 months you have to get yourself appointed to the either of the house, or else you will lose your ministership. So it is kind of you are a parliamentarian plus you are an executive minister, and that is what is known as the dual membership role in a parliamentary system. So as an executive, you come to the house, you may be held accountable in the house as well. The prime minister is the leader, but he is leading a team of people who are supposed to be so-called the government. He is the leader of the Council of Ministers. He is the leader in the Parliament. He is the leader in the Lok Sabha. In his capacity, he plays a very crucial role in the functioning of the government. But I think democratic leadership does come into existence in a parliamentary system of government. Of course, the ministers in a parliamentary system of government have to take an oath. They have to operate in secrecy. They have to follow the procedure of accountability and transparency to the legislature. So you will notice that the parliamentary system creates some kind of accountability, which is called dual accountability. One, that the government and the ministers are accountable to the members of parliament within these two houses, where whenever the parliament is convened, you will notice that they have to answer to the questions, they have to be responsible, and these are part of open records. Second, these ministers and these members of parliament are accountable to the people as such, because of course there will be an election, and during those elections accountability can also be ensured. What are the features of the presidential model, right, before we come to the merits and demerits? So in the presidential model, you will notice that the president is so powerful that he not only heads the government in the federal or the union government, he is actually the head of the states as well. So he occupies a ceremonial position as the head of state governments, and he has all the executive power of the central government. The president is elected in the United States for a tenure of 4 years, and he cannot be removed by the Congress except by an impeachment for grave constitutional acts, or what I call as grave unconstitutional acts, not constitutional, grave breach of the Constitution. So that is something that is provided for, and sure many of us are following whether an impeachment can happen to Donald Trump in the United States because of the number of criminal cases that have been filed against him. But that's a very rare instance. It has never happened, so that is something that is very important. He can have some kind of a small cabinet. To be honest, the president can have a small cabinet. He's allowed to do that, but they are merely advisors to the president. So the president finally has to decide on their behalf. They have no independent position or accountability, and they are usually not elected. So these so-called cabinet ministers of the president are not elected, so they don't have any kind of direct accountability to the people. Neither are they directly accountable to the legislature, though they can be done so through various committees that are constituted by the legislature from time to time, where they may be asked to call or state whatever is required. So, what happens in a presidential form of government is during the tenure of the president is not accountable to the Congress at all, and he may address the Congress, he may ask the Congress to support his bills and his vision, but that is two different things. He is not an automatic member of the Congress as soon as he becomes the president. So, neither is he the leader of the House as soon as he becomes the president, though the parties remain the same and they support their president. Uh, Interestingly, the president in the United States cannot dissolve the House of Representatives. So he has no role to play there. So he is neither the member nor the decider. So the House of Representatives is an independent body, and the president has no role to play over there as well. So it is kind of stated that the separation of power theory, which is an American kind of a doctrine, is the basis for the American presidential form of government, where the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary are separated and vested as the three organs of the government. So the president is the real executive. He, he can pass certain orders, but he cannot make real law. The real law is with the legislature. The president, as the real executive, is not a member of the legislature. So the legislature is independent. The president cannot dissolve the legislature. He is not involved with the same. So that separation theory works really well in the United States. Um, so, having said these, kind of so-called features of the presidential form of government, let us look at some of the merits of the parliamentary system. Friends, the merits of the parliamentary system are very visible and very much there. I think it's very, very important that big countries with diverse ethnic and cultural, kind of challenges go in for a parliamentary system of government. That is much, much better because one, please note, there is a harmony that gets created by the legislature and the executive. So please note, the legislature and the executive have to work in tandem to run the country. They cannot be in separation or in isolation. Like usually what happens in the United States, there is a deadlock very often between the executive and the legislature. So cooperation between the legislature and the executive is ensured in a parliamentary system because many of the legislatures are in executive position and many of the executives may hold parliamentary positions as well. So this results in less conflict and less disputes, and it probably goes on to establish a more democratic and responsible government. And please note, when I say responsibility, the parliament can ensure the responsibility of the executive by issues like, say, there is a question hour in the parliament. There are discussions, sometimes no confidence motion. So this is how the other members of the parliament can control the executive organ of the government. Very importantly, I believe that the parliamentary system, because it establishes collective actions and collective responsibility, prevents kind of an uh, kind of a dictatorial, or what we can say as an issue of concentration of power in the hands of a single individual. So I think this kind of tendency to have the power to your own self and to create a system where it would result in one man deciding for all. That system is somehow dissolved through the parliamentary system. So the parliamentary and quasi-federal system ensure that the dual form of government and the collective form of parliamentary system ensures to a larger extent that the authority cannot be dictatorial, and that is something, the tendency can be curbed in the parliamentary system more easily than in the presidential system. Um, of course, what does the parliamentary system also do is that there is always an alternate to the ruling party. So if the ruling party loses confidence, the other party in the opposition can always stake a claim. So if one party goes, the other party is always there. So the parliamentary system ensures that the country is not dependent upon one individual and one party. So the leadership of the opposition becomes very critical and important in a parliamentary system. And that's why you will notice that in Britain, the opposition also has something called the shadow ministers. So these are ministers who are in the opposition who are watching the minister in power. So they are shadow ministers and they are like, checking and accounting to what the minister has done. Also, the parliamentary system is based on what we call as a wider representation. And this is possible because all sections of the society and the regions can have their representation. And there is a possibility that ministers or ministerial berths can be taken by anyone. So it's not that someone is deprived of the same. If you are qualified to be a member of parliament, if you are able to gain membership to the parliament, you will be qualified to be a minister. So ministers from very remote regions of India have worked for the government. They have been given ministerial berth, both cabinet and state or otherwise. And that is how I think a wider representation in government and governmental decision making can be ensured through the parliamentary system. Of course, are there demerits of the parliamentary system? There are a few demerits. Of course, this can definitely take place. One is unstable government, because you have to keep proving your confidence time and again whenever a no confidence motion is brought about. Stability of the government is sometimes challenging unless a party gets clear majority and there is no division between the parties due to anti-defection. Whereas in a presidential form of government, for the 4 years, the president's office is secure, so it's a stable government. So there have been some challenges, especially in a multi-party democracy and where a single party has not been able to win a clear majority in the central government or in the state government. So the challenging prime ministers or the challenging time that some prime ministers of India have faced, you can take the name of say Morarji Desai, Charan Singh, VP Singh, Chandrasekhar Devegowda, IK Gujral, and finally Mr. Vajpayee. These are some of the examples which wherein the prime ministers were not able to complete their entire 5-year term. They were not able to give stable government for the simple reason is that their party, which was the leading party in the alliance or in the coalition, was not able to get a full majority. And through their alliance, they had just what is known as a wafer thin majority, and sometimes that would be lost in a no confidence motion. So these prime ministers unfortunately had to struggle to survive in their office, and their continuity was questioned because of political defections and the evils of what we call as the multi-party coalition have created a time when India had to face unstable governments. Second, I think one of the other demerits of the parliamentary system is that if a country is looking for very long-term policies or long-term, social transformation, then the presidential form of government is much better than a parliamentary system of government. So in terms of how experiences have happened, that's clearly how things have moved. That the presidential form of government is always good for long-term uniform development as against the parliamentary system of government. Um, yeah, some have criticized the parliamentary system because it is in violation of the separation of powers doctrine, and they say that there is too much of concentration of power in the cabinet, and sometimes the cabinet itself can pass a no confidence motion against the prime minister, and hence the whole system of government, though in letter is collective, but in spirit it can actually result in a lot of misuse and abuse of power as well. So that is how the demerits of the parliamentary system are sometimes discussed. So we must probably know both of them. Now, the distinction between the Indian and the British system of parliament, I think let us just take one or two very quickly distinctions to understand. First and the foremost, please note while Indian parliamentary system is largely based on the UK parliamentary system, we have not replicated the British system as it is. We have made changes, and the differences are a few. For example, India has a republic or republicanism system of government. Now, the republican system of democratic parliamentary system means we have no monarch. The monarchical system is done away with. We don't have anyone as the king or the queen. The head of the state in India is the president. The head of the government is the president in the central, and in the state it is the governors. So we do not have any kind of hereditary to the positions of the head of the state. So it is purely by election, it is by choice, and it can change from time to time. So the British system, British is not a republic. British is a parliamentary system. We are a parliamentary system plus we are a republic. The British system is based on the sovereignty of the parliament. The parliament, is kind of supreme in Britain, and it kind of enjoys quite unlimited powers. In India, the supremacy of the constitution is with the people. The sovereignty lies with the people and not entirely with the parliament. So the Parliament of India enjoys limited powers, and they are governed by the written constitution. And such kind of powers of the Parliament is subject always to judicial review, as the case may be. The major difference in the British versus Indian constitution is in Britain, the Prime Minister should always be a member of the lower house. Whereas in India, the Prime Minister can be a member of either of the house, either Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. That's how it is. And also, you will notice that in India, a minister can also be a member of either of the houses, unlike what is there in Britain. In Britain, there is something called the legal responsibility of ministers, which is not there in India. So in India, unlike in Britain, the ministers are not required to countersign the official acts of the heads of the state. So that is what is there. And then I told you about the shadow cabinet rule in Britain. It's a unique system where the opposition party has a cabinet member to each of the departments. They are also like the ministers for future, and there is no such institution in India called the shadow ministry rule. So these are some of the distinctions between the Indian and British model of the parliamentary system. Now, why did India adopt the parliamentary system, and why are we not moving to a presidential form of government? This has been kind of a debate from time to time for a long period of time that we are quite fascinated by the American model, and hence a lot of time we feel that we should shift to the presidential form, and the parliamentary system is not giving you a very strong leadership, as the case may be. I think to justify the parliamentary system, I think we must try and look at the presidential system, where we say the presidential system is based on what we call as the single executive system. Now, is it possible that in India, every power in the central government is given only to one person without any checks and balances as such? So I think if you talk about responsible government, the parliamentary system is much better suited rather than concentrating everything just in a single executive or in a president who enjoys every kind of a power. So I think autocracy may easily come in a presidential form of government, whereas in a parliamentary form of government, the chances of autocracy is far more less. And also, it is important to understand that presidential form of government does not give wider and broader representation. And that, I think, is a very major demerit of the presidential form. The same can be ensured through the parliamentary form of government. And I believe that the domination of one person as the president in terms of the policies of the nation have to be as a tendency curve. Of course, the American Constitution, the American system is more stable, but that does not mean the parliamentary system has not been able to give stable governments or is anyway less responsible than what a government in the presidential form is. Uh, I am not a special person who wants to take the doctrine of separation of power as to be a very important doctrine to keep this checks and balances between the legislature, executive, and the judiciary. So the doctrine of separation of power theory is very good. It is important, whereas it's not a kind of a sacred rule that it should be followed in its absolute sense. So I think we are very good in mix matching the separation of power theory, in allowing the legislature also to execute, in allowing the executive to also legislate, and of course making the judiciary make the law. So I think this kind of a hybrid feature of the separation of power theory in India has worked increasingly well, and I think we have been able to hold on to the vibrancy of the Indian constitutional democracy, and also I think to a larger extent the kind of heterogeneous state that we have, or the plural society that we have in India. I think for all of these, the parliamentary system offers a greater scope, and it gives all sections of the community greater interest in government formation, in government spirit, in formation of the government policies, and also laying down public administration. And I think the parliamentary system has also protected national integrity, has protected the national spirit to build people's resilience in terms of what is a national debate and what is a regional debate. And I think the parliamentary system is doing a fantastic job. And I don't see any reason why this should be replaced with the presidential system at any cost. However, I must also go on to say that if one looks at the basic structure theory, one would come to this conclusion that the parliamentary system of government is a basic structure, and this, at any point of time as of now, is not subject to any change.